to work with loops in C++. So we're going to see how we can write effective loops. And this basically video is intended for beginners who are learning C++ and who might find it difficult working with loops. So just to start with, I believe loops are an essential part of any programming language. And that said, I think when we start working with loops, we are sometimes faced with some confusion. So I would like to remove any such confusion using this video. So I hope this helps you out. And if it does, please like the video. First thing, I'm using Visual Studio Code for this video. Visual Studio Code is basically from Microsoft, and it's free of cost, so you can just download it. It supports a whole variety of languages, and it's a great tool. It's color coded, and I'm going to save it in data called loops.cpp. So I should have access to loops, and as soon as I do that, it asks me if I want C++ extension, and it's installing it. So really good, really works really well. Things first, let's write the skeleton code that you would write for any C++ program. So hash include iostream. This is the most common include file that you will use. This supports input and output from the screen. And then we're going to say using namespace standard. This allows us to write cins and couts in the program without the scope resolution, without mentioning essentially which class they belong to. If you don't understand what that means, don't worry about it just now. For now, let's just say that these are the essentials for writing the program. Okay, then system.pause, which allows us to remain on the screen, on the terminal screen, once we are done writing. This will obviously depend on compiler to compiler. In some compilers which are terminal based, for instance, if you're using a terminal based compiler in a Mac or Linux, you won't need to use this line. So let's say the compiler, let's say that we want to basically work with loops, and the reason why you would want to work with loops is because loops help us in running the same code in iterations. So if you want to run the same code like 20 times, 100 times, 100,000 times, you don't want to write the same piece of code over and over again. What you can do is you can put that code once in a loop, and the loop will essentially take care of the rest. So the most useful use case that you will come across being a beginner in programming is when you have to parse through or traverse through the arrays, right? So I'm going to declare a simple integer array called arr, and for mentioning how long or how many elements this array has, I'm going to define a size. So this define basically serves as a global variable. It is also a preprocessor directive, so it's a global variable that tells the compiler before even it starts executing the program, compiling the program, that there is a variable called size that is going to be used in the program. Okay, next up we move to the other part, which is where to use this. So how long is our array going to be? It's going to be size long, and size is 5, so my array has 5 elements, and I can initialize all of those 5 elements like this. So what this does is it goes ahead and puts a 0 in all of those integer places in the memory. I can alternatively provide my own values, which I'm going to do just like this. Now think about accessing one or more elements in this array. So let's say you want to access cout arr0. What do you think this should print on the screen? If you said 1, then you are correct, because 0 is the first element in the array. What do you think this prints on the screen? If you said 5, then you are correct. This is the last element in the array. So our array goes from element 0 to element 4. Now imagine if the size of this array were 100, then you would have to write 100 different couts, and you wouldn't want to do that. And so we just don't do it like this. How we do it is we write loops. So a simple for loop has 3 components. Well, let's say 3 structural components, and then one component is the code that you actually want to repeat. So the first component is the index variable or the loop variable, and the second one is the stop case, and the third one is the increment. Make sure you use the correct case because C is case sensitive. So this is the initialization part right here. It says declare an integer I, initialize it with the value of 0. So our I starts with a 0 and it increments by 1 in each iteration. It stops when I becomes greater when I becomes greater than or equal to size. Okay, as long as that is not the case, for loop is going to run. So now we put our cout statement that we were printing earlier inside for, and we say I. This is our index variable. In the first iteration, the value is 0. Second iteration, the value is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And therefore, this for loop will print all of your array. So this is your for loop. If you have more than one statements inside the for loop, then you will need to put curly brackets. So if you have more than one statement, just like I'm going to do right now, cout arr, let's say cout and line. So you want to give it a line feed each time you print a number. These are 2 statements. Both of these are in the for loop. They have to be in curly brackets. So this is your code block here. Next up, we move to the while loop. So the while loop is kind of an open loop. And why I say open is because this is the syntax for while loop. Essentially, this is your while loop. Because you cannot say that with a for loop, although not all of these structural parameters for a for loop are mandatory. Some of them are optional. We're not going to get into that right now. So because a while loop is this simple, you have to take care of this, and this yourself. The first thing, I'm going to declare a variable called j. I'm going to initialize it to 0, and I'm going to follow what I did with my while loop, with my for loop, and that means that I'm going to say the stop case or the comparison. This is also called the stop case. The stop case is j less than size. So while j is less than size, this while loop is going to run. Next up, I'm going to write my cout statement. I could actually just copy it from there. And now, what is left? Now, we have taken care of this part. We have also taken care of the stop case, but we have yet not taken care of the increment. So we manually go ahead and increment j every time. Now, if you run this code, both of these codes essentially will have the same output. Let me put the second cout statement here as well. So both this for loop and this while loop will have exactly the same output. That's it. That's as far as the basics of for and while loop are concerned. We're going to, in the next video, we're going to talk in a little more detail about how memories work and how are we actually able to go from one element to the next element in an array just by increasing the index number. So what does an index number really mean? How is it implemented in the memory? Because when you're programming, if you have an idea of how memory works, by memory I mean your RAM, it makes it all the more interesting and less complicated for you. Thank you. If you like the video, please don't forget to hit the like button.